Okay, it's 9 p.m., so we'll call to order this regular council meeting of the Town of Saugeen Shores. And the first item is disclosures of pecuniary interest. Is there anyone with a pecuniary interest with anything on the agenda? Seeing none, of course, you can declare any time if you need to. Next is additions, deletions, amendments, and we don't have any to my knowledge. Next is adoption of minutes. So I have a motion that's been moved by Councillor Matheson, seconded by Councillor Mike Myatt, that Council adopt the minutes of the Council meeting of October the 13th, 2015 as presented. Any questions or comments to those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. Next is the Committee of the Whole minutes, and I have a motion moved by Councillor Dave Myatt, seconded by Councillor Grace, that the Council note and file the Committee of the Whole minutes of October 13th, 2015. Questions or comments to those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. Takes us on to reports of Committee of the Whole, and the first item is Environmental Services and Transportation report, and it has been moved by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, seconded by Councillor Minaj, that Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores adopts the Environmental Services and Transportation report dated October 13th, 2015, recommending that Council gives pre-budget approval for an expenditure to refurbish the landfill compactor in the amount of $250,000. Are there questions or comments? All in favor? Takes us on to item 2, Community Services, Parks and Recreation report, and I have a motion moved by Councillor Rich, seconded by Councillor Mike Myatt, that the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores adopts the Community Services, Parks and Recreation report dated October 13th, 2015, recommending that Council approves option B as the approved gateway sign for Port Elgin, as outlined in the Director of Community Services staff report dated October 13th, 2015. Questions or comments? Being none. Councillor Minaj.
I believe there was some follow-up on that. So we asked when that was presented that some of the lettering colors be looked further into, and the backdrop where they were going to be located. I think there was some other questions asked of Jane at that time. Can you remember?
I think information on locations is forthcoming. Probably that hasn't yet been settled with regard to the design council, or pardon, the committee recommended the approval of option B. So, I mean, I would take that as recommending approval of option B as presented. But Larry, do we have any update on the discussion about locations?
Nothing formal at this point in time. I know she's pursuing conversations with both the county and potentially the Ministry of Transportation. I did hear there was a potential opportunity to put the southern sign on a private site as a result of a conversation this week, but nothing's materialized in that respect.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Being none, all in favor? That's carried. That takes us on to report of municipal officers and committees, and we have a staff report on special event Winter Classic Hockey Tournament. Are we going to give that report? All right. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Minaj, seconded by Councillor Grace, that Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores grants permission to the Port Elgin BIA to host the annual Winter Classic Hockey Tournament on Saturday, November 21st, 2015, and further that the following roads closures be approved from 1:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Green Street, Godrich Street to Waterloo Street, and Green Street, Godrich Street to Bricker Street. Questions or comments? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. I'm assuming this is written the way that it is because the intersection is not being disrupted on the highway. That's a good thing. I'm just curious, and I realize that the Director of Public Works is no longer here. The last time that we had a request to close Green Street from Godrich Street to Bricker Street, there's one particular commercial activity there that has a parking lot that is impacted by this. I'd just like to make sure that this has taken into account in consultation with that particular property owner has happened because, this is another Saturday, it's an afternoon, and they have a parking lot to service their particular business location. So I guess Stuart's not here to respond to this, but perhaps, Larry, you can just make sure that if it hasn't happened, that at least a comment or a call be made to that property owner, just like it was the last time. Thank you.
The CAO.
Through you, yes, Stuart will follow up with that individual. I believe they have had a conversation on this subject already.
Further questions or comments? Pardon me. Sorry about that. It's strange to see him a cross-table motion. Seconded by Councillor Rich. The motion is moved by Councillor Minaj, seconded by Councillor Rich. Pardon me for that. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. I was just wondering, who are we looking at targeting for the hockey tournament aspect of this? I assume it's a ball hockey tournament, correct?
The CAO.
It's a BIA event, so I presume it's ball, because I don't believe we're going to flood the road.
Do you have any idea who they're targeting? Are there charges? Is there an entry fee, anything like that?
I'm sorry, we'll have to follow up with the details. I believe it's intended to raise funds, if I recall correctly.
I'm quite certain we can get you information from the BIO. Maybe Councillor Minaj would have information. Councillor Minaj?
Well, I don't, but tomorrow night I'm attending a BIA meeting. So as soon as I attend the BIA meeting, I will confirm the details, and I will email out the details to everyone.
Thank you for that. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. All right, and that takes us on then to bylaws. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Matheson, seconded by Councillor Rich, that bylaw 86-2015 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 36-2014 being the bylaw for regulating or prohibiting of animals being at large or trespassing and for the impounding of such animals and recoverable fines is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 26th day of October 2015. Questions or comments? Councillor Minaj.
So at the last time the staff report came forward, I noted a number of other concerns with the bylaw. So these weren't addressed this time. So can I ask that for an opportunity then either to ask? So this goes two ways. Either you agree, Deputy Mayor, that we should have this bylaw opened up with more information, so staff would work on it. We would give them information as to what other concerns we have with the bylaw, and they would bring it back for a further revision. This was a monetary, financial issue for this bylaw, fees and charges, and it made perfectly good sense. Or we use the notice of motion and we develop a motion, or I develop a motion saying the following needs to be changed or needs to be researched, or we need a staff report. So which way would you prefer we go? Thank you.
I don't agree with your options. I'm not in charge here. Council is. If council can do whatever it wishes at this moment with this bylaw, it can defer it, it can refuse it, it can do whatever it wants. So it's not up to me. It's up to council. I have a motion before me. I will call the motion if no other alternative is presented to me. Councillor Rich.
I as well do recall Councillor Minaj bringing forward a number of concerns or ideas, I think, with regard to it. So is the process that what he recommends that it's looked at by staff, and then does a report come back, or how does it address? How is his questions addressed? Because he did have questions in the past. Because I kind of assumed that it was going to come back and we were going to look at it again after with changes or without changes based on his questions.
Maybe we could ask the clerk to make comment on what changes have been made to date based on the comments of members of council.
Certainly. The changes that have been made to date were specific to the staff report that was presented at the last committee of whole meeting. And those were the only changes that were made. Certainly if additional ideas need to be revisited or visited in the first place, I would suggest that it is a notice of motion on what you would like as a council member to discuss in the future.
Yep, Councillor Minaj.
I think I know the answer. So it's not like we only get so many kicks at these bylaws, and then they get put away like Disney movies, and they get put in the vault and they don't resurface again for a number of years. If I wanted to, I could do a notice of motion with a number of other recommended changes. But the problem with that is that's us doing the recommendation as opposed to staff listening to our concerns and staff bringing up a second report that says, based on the concerns we heard, here is another set of revisions to this bylaw. The first set were to do with finance. The next set is to do with revising the language of the bylaw to do with, for example, the definition of an owner. Is the definition of an owner correct? And I don't believe it is. So when are we going to address that issue? When would you like to address that issue? I can bring a notice of motion, or should staff, based on this discussion and based on the last time we had this discussion, be taking a note and saying we should refine or look at the definition of an owner and bring it forward for a future revision?
I'll just comment again that council can proceed by passing this bylaw and changing it anytime it wants to, or council can not pass the bylaw this evening, can defer passage, and can then give any direction it wants to staff as to how it wants to proceed from there on. The council is under no obligation at this moment to pass this bylaw. Or, I mean, it's up to you. It's entirely up to you what you want to do with it at this moment. Councillor Dave Myatt.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I too recall the October 13th debate in Committee of the Whole on this, and based on that discussion of that night, and based on my understanding of the proposed changes to this bylaw, I too voted in the negative, but my recollection was that it passed anyway. And so that's the reason that it's here tonight. And now, based on what I'm hearing procedurally, I would like to move that this bylaw be deferred until such time a motion can be drafted that addresses some of the legitimate concerns that were raised on October the 13th.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Grace. So the direction going forward, if this were to pass, would be that the bylaw would be deferred, and that staff would return with a report outlining the changes that were requested by council in the previous session, and we would then have the opportunity to kick those around and approve or not approve further amendments to the bylaw. So we have a motion on the floor to defer. Any questions or comments to the motion? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. All right. Then the next bylaw number 2, and is to authorize an agreement with Dr. Gibb. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Mike Myatt, seconded by Councillor Matheson, that bylaw 87-2015, being a bylaw to authorize an agreement with Dr. Julie Gibb, is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 26th day of October 2015. Questions or comments? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
This is a very good news story, and the report is worded in such a way that you know, we're fortunate to have this agreement before us, and I agree with that. However, really important to read what it says here. By passing this bylaw, we are pretty much agreeing to accelerate some capital expenditures that were not forecasted for happening in 2016. And we don't have any dollar figures in here to suggest what kind of numbers we're talking about. I find that a little bit challenging, although I agree with the the motion, and we'll be voting for it, but I would have appreciated a little more information, perhaps a sub-report which set out the additional potential expenditures that we're talking about here, because I don't believe that the Dr. Earl Medical Clinic is paid for yet, so we have an outstanding debt for a period of time. We did have a sense of, I know we've got the drawings for some potential expansion, but we made some adjustments when when the group came into to share the space. So are the drawings up to date? What kind of dollars are we talking about? So I think it's wonderful that Dr. Julie Gibb is interested in coming here, but this bylaw is setting the stage for, it's almost like pre-budget approval for some further work at the Dr. Earl Clinic, and I'm not necessarily opposed to that. However, we don't have any information about what we're talking about in terms of dollars here. So I'll be voting for this, but I am disappointed that we are not receiving additional information very specific to the timeline associated with the additional work that would be required and the potential expense. Thank you, Mr. Vice or Deputy Mayor. Sorry.
Are you me or am I you? I can't remember. The CAO.
I think the report tried to make it clear that this is a more unique kind of agreement than you typically have staff place before you. It has come together fairly quickly, and Council will have a budget package distributed to it next week, and we hope to have the number in there. We are working on making sure that it is something that we can report with some degree of accuracy. We did install some of the core structural services to the rear part of the facility as part of our improvements that we completed a couple of years ago, so we are, I hope, one step ahead. But there has been a redistribution of space within the existing facility that frankly precludes this individual from establishing a practice in the current facility, which is why we've tried to make it clear to you that there is a potential further impact for Council's next budget consideration.
Thank you. And I think it's just to be very clear that the Vice Deputy Mayor made the comment about pre-budget approval, and just to draw that line really clearly, it's in here. The proposed agreement contains a clause to the effect that in the event funds are not allocated by Council for the expansion project as part of the 2016 capital budget process, the agreement could be terminated by either party. So it is not a commitment. It's in no way does the agreement commit us to spend the money. It's a decision we have to make one way or the other. But I think it's just to draw that line very clearly that this action that we're taking tonight does not commit us to the expenditure. I saw Councillor Mike Myatt.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Charbonneau. I've made the statement before, and I'll say it again tonight, that one orphan patient is one too many, and I think it's a wonderful, good news story that Dr. Gibb is planning to come here, potentially a 10-year agreement, which is really in some cases unheard of. I mean, we hear lots of 5-year agreements, but there's consideration for a 10-year agreement, which I think is wonderful news. I think that the clinic expansion at the Dr. Earl Medical Clinic was inevitable. I think that, with an orphan patient list still in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000, and we're recruiting doctors, where do we put this person? So I think it's one of those costs that, yes, we will be talking about it, a capital budget. And, we kind of have a gun to our heads, so to speak, that, if we don't approve, then maybe Dr. Gibb doesn't come. But, so, yeah, I understand the concern, but I think it's just a really, really good news story. And here's another piece of information from the report, in that Dr. Gibb is, will be setting up larger than current day standard family practice over time. And I think that is better news again. So I think this is good news. Good news comes like this comes with a cost, and there is room to expand in the back end of the Dr. Earl Medical Clinic, and yes, there are going to be costs associated. But boy, this is a good news story. And if I could just throw this number out for all those people listening at home, I know there's lots, but I've been getting a few phone calls at home about from orphan patients, and here's a number. and for the media. But continue to register with Healthcare Connect. And to indicate that you don't have a family doctor is 1-866-532-3161. It's really, really important that people register with Healthcare Connect and try and get off that onto the list and off of the orphan patient list. So good news story, but it's going to come with a cost, no question.
Thanks, Councillor Myatt. Councillor Minaj.
In keeping with the same line of thinking on financial conservatism, and I can't agree more that we need another doctor, and I get that it costs money. My question would be, it would be more difficult if this was a pre-budget approval, as has been suggested by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, that we found out that the number was, north of $200,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 to equip the rest of that building, and it was a lump sum. But I get the distinct feeling we should be thinking that this is an asset, a continued asset that has a lifespan 20 to 40 years out. So wouldn't it be? Can we ask the CAO? Wouldn't it be more reasonable to think that for every $100,000 of cost, so if we broke it into portions of $100,000, that over 10 years that's $10,000 on a continued debenture, and over 20 years that's $5,000 per year. I mean, those are numbers that we should be able to give pre-budget approval for and get the work done, and so that we can get this doctor in place as soon as possible. So could we have a comment from the CAO, please?
Through Mr. Deputy Mayor, in fact, Ms. Gibb is not in a position to start a practice prior to next fall in any event, which is why we thought that although this is unconventional, we would commit to her now if that's council's wish, and then scramble in the spring to get the work done. And to give you some sense of numbers, my thinking at the moment is we are in the range of $200,000 to complete the work. We have not crossed the financing bridge yet. I think there'll be a number of capital projects council will have in front of it that we want some preliminary feedback on, and then staff will go back as part of the space and time between the first budget meeting and the second budget meeting to talk about strategies to implement those items that council wants to see continue.
Yeah, Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I will be supporting this. If there's any opportunity to get another doctor into town, I'm all for it. And if there's a risk of losing one, we need to make sure that we do everything that we can to bring physicians to our community.
Thank you for that. Nothing further than I think we'd be very glad to welcome Dr. Gibb to our community, and very happy to see this agreement in place. So, with that, yes, I know, you've heard the motion. I'm just trying to remember if you've heard the motion. You've heard the motion, so all in favor? That's carried. And that then takes us on to the confirmatory bylaw. It's been moved by Councillor Gray, seconded by Councillor Dave Mayette, that the bylaw 88-2015, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores, is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 26th day of October 2015. All in favor? And I have a motion moved by Councillor Gray, seconded by Councillor Dave Mayette, that this regular council meeting of October 26, 2015 hereby adjourns at 9:24 p.m. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you all very much.